Gutshall. He's a graduate of Penn State also in art. So our company is based on both the science and the engineering as well as the design and implementation of sustainable landscapes, natural resource management, and restoration. So what I'm going to be doing today, Ben Eberhardt is an engineer with our office, and he'll be here this afternoon. He'll be talking about more of the technical aspects of stream restoration. I'm going to be getting started with just kind of giving you some overview on sustainable landscapes and how we actually implement some of these projects, just kind of the background. And over 25 years of doing this, a lot of what we're going to be, what I'm going to be talking about a lot is the fact that we learn so much through doing these projects, learning over time how they change, and the lessons learned with it. And we are continually adapting the process over that time. So I'm hoping that the information I'll be able to convey to you today will be based on kind of real life experience and some of the things that we've experienced over time. So that's kind of the goal. You should also be aware I'm actually deaf. I hear with 2 cochlear implants. And so if I'm walking past you and you ask me a question, I ignore you. It's not just happy, but I can hear fine with the implants. Okay, so to get started, we're going to focus on riparian buffers and stream areas and stormwater BMPs. And one of the components is related to actually sustainable landscapes and what they are. So we'll be looking at, number 1, the public perceptions. I think this is critical to the success of the design, is really understanding how to implement these into the landscape and understanding how the public is perceiving them. We'll be looking at native plants. We'll talk, just kind of give an overview. Now tomorrow, how many are you coming to the session tomorrow? Okay, so we have about a third to a half will be here tomorrow. We'll be getting into a lot more detail related to the actual design, talking more in specific about native plants, invasive plants, and things like that. Today I'm just going to be giving you a bit of an overview and just talk a little bit about general issues associated with native plants and invasive plants. I'm going to be talking about the challenges of implementation, and then I'll show you a couple examples. So that's what we'll be talking about this morning. Public perceptions. When landscape design, landscape architecture, through to implementation and landscape contractors, what's the public's perception of the landscape? And it's important to understand this from the standpoint of then trying to apply these, what's being termed kind of a new approach to landscape, using these sustainable landscapes and native plants. Landscaping historically has been about aesthetics. It hasn't been related to the function. The function meaning, we'll be talking more about that, water quality benefits and habitat benefits. Typically, the resident and folks, conventionally look at landscapes from an aesthetic standpoint. The one, when you look at designing, or even as a homeowner or someone that's coming in to put in a hotel or some kind of commercial property, they look at their site and they start with the building or the house, and the canvas is the lawn, and then they add the landscaping into that. That's pretty typical of how we approach landscaping. So the lawn is actually the canvas, and then we actually put the landscaping into it. The planting is islands as opposed to creating any kind of connectivity. And when you talk about sustainable landscapes and really improving habitat and biodiversity, those linkages, those corridors are so important. So what happens is we end up with very fragmented landscape islands, and the control that people really like to see it comes down to the control, is that edge. Is the edge that really gives people that sense of, oh, so they're taking care of it. It gives them something nice and clean to look at. So this is what we're working with, is these perceptions that, you know, have been historically in the landscape, even started, I guess, back in England, in the castles and those huge, beautiful gardens in Versailles and things like that. It's been carried to our country, and it's kind of stayed, and I think been based on all the industry that has been built around it, with the landscape contracting industry and so on. So when we're looking at, all right, how do we start to look at how people perceive those landscapes and how we actually integrate sustainable landscapes into the built environment? This is one example that I'll kind of walk you through as to how the approach is that we take implementing that. And this was, I guess it was about 1989, 1990 that we looked at this project, worked with the architect on it. And at the time, it was a really, really new approach, because we basically looked at the context of the site overall. The actual property line, the property line actually comes across like this. And around it is some old field and some farm fields and things like that. It's a maintenance facility for a township. And what we did was we actually flipped the process, and instead of saying that the entire site is lawn, and that's the canvas, and then started to add the little islands of, say, BMPs or planting or buffers or whatever start getting plugged into it, we actually looked at the context of the site and brought the meadow in, and then used that edge, and the lawn is actually kind of the design element, and the meadow then wrapped in and around, so we created kind of a buffer here in front. This is the main drive. It's a maintenance facility, so I guess from an architectural standpoint, the architect looked at it like, well, this is usually a throwaway project. They put a shed up or something like that, and you know, there really isn't much potential of creating something creative because the budget is so low. So we tried again to look at, can we take something that really is a throwaway type project and do something interesting with it? So looked at pushing the building back against this steep slope so that the back wall of the building could actually be part of the retaining wall in the back, and then sloped up to that. Put in French drains the whole way around the building. The architect implemented kind of an interesting roof runoff area in front that when it rains, the way this building is pitched, this actually is a waterfall that comes down into this bioretention area in front of the building. So the front foundation plantings end up being kind of a stormwater BMP per se, and then implemented a wetland stormwater facility on this side. There is an overflow here that has an inlet that then gets piped to a typical infrastructure. But overall, it was taking those perceptions, flipping them around, looking at a new way to approach it and integrate it into the landscape. So that was the approach. The considerations when you're doing that, and I'm going to be talking a lot about some of these, and especially tomorrow I'll be getting into a lot more detail. But these are what we find as probably the 5 main components of when you're looking at the design, what makes a project successful and what makes the implementation successful. And probably the first and most important, I'll be talking about it a lot, is what are the soil conditions? What's the hydrologic conditions? You have to understand that and then match the type of planting that you're going to be putting into those soil conditions. If the soil conditions are really nasty, you know, say they're very clay or there's not much organic matter at all, there are plant material out there that can be used in those situations, and it's just a matter of understanding what plants work depending on the actual soil conditions and matching them. Plant identification, we really feel strongly that when you're doing these successional landscapes, there's an understanding of the native plants and what is native and indigenous to the area, and being able to identify those and know, basically you end up with kind of a palette for that area, for that region, but also to understand what are the invasive species that are very common to the area, sometimes to a specific site or to the particular region, and being able to identify those. So those are the two main components of the plant identification. Right plant, right place. So I talked about soils, but also the hydrology, the conditions from, is it canopied understory, is it open? Being able to look at all of that and use that to kind of narrow down your selections of what you're going to be using. Then the design, the aesthetics, the component that I just talked about, and how you kind of look at the overall site and start to work the regional components into it, that idea of connectivity, and looking at the whole site instead of just plugging in the landscape into it. Aesthetics, views, circulation, just basic landscape design also needs to be considered. Are there components that you can add circulation, even trail systems or something like that? Are there things that can be done to address and buffer views? Some of the grasses, they may be, people think of a meadow as being short. Well, there's many grasses that get 5 or 6 foot high. Well, if you have a grass that's 5 or 6 foot high, you can't see through that. It ends up being a visual buffer. So really understanding that and working with it. You don't, in some cases, you don't want to completely block a view. It makes people uncomfortable. In other cases, there are views you want to block. So understanding basic design. And then probably what we feel is the most important aspect of this, outside of understanding the site and the soils, is designing with the understanding of how it's going to be implemented and how it's going to be maintained. There are decisions that need to be made on what type of planting you want to do that also considers how it's going to be maintained, how much money is going to be there for maintaining it, what kind of equipment or what kind of resources are available to actually maintain it. So it's all important to the project. This is another example, kind of an overview, taking an existing project and going back in and looking at retrofitting. And you talked yesterday a lot about stormwater BMPs and regenerative design and things like that. This is taking a conventional site. Actually, this is a school district. There's a middle school here and an elementary school. And the local watershed group was looking at projects that within the headwaters of the stream where they could actually implement some sustainable landscapes that actually have a function to improve water quality. So in this case, this area, this is pretty much the main campus, is right along this edge here. This is the stream that runs down through here. There's an existing residential community at this point. And so this is all open space that goes up against kind of steep slopes, and this area is all wooded down below. So there's this area that's light green was what in golf they actually refer to it as dead zones. We refer to it as kind of these fringe areas. It's an area that really they're maintaining it, they're mowing it because they really don't know what else to do. It was disturbed during construction. And is there a way that we can apply some type of sustainable landscape that will give them more water quality benefits? There are stormwater basins. There's an existing basin at this point and a swale that goes down and discharges into the stream at this point. This is what that swale looks like. It's stable, it's pretty much rip-rap the whole way down through, but again, they're just mowing on both sides. So here's an opportunity where we could implement some type of lower maintenance area. We're looking at a meadow in this case, and then retrofit the detention basins. They get periodic inundation with water, so there'll be a different type of plant material that would be established in there, but again, something to improve water quality. So we met with the school district, and one of their concerns, they're like, this is a great idea, it's going to reduce maintenance, but we have security issues. We want to be able to see, because we have the kids that come back into this wooded area and they party or they do whatever. We want to be able to see down in there. So it's really important that we don't have a meadow that's this high through that area. So what we did was we came up with a meadow seed mix based on the soil conditions that won't get over 3 to 4 foot high. Some of the seed heads might come up to about 4 foot, but that gives them the ability to have the surveillance. We also are proposing a very well-established loop trail that actually creates the transition between that more naturalized area and then the area that they actually maintain and use. And that trail acts as kind of a nice edge that gives you that edge that I talked about earlier that's so important. And it also helps to get people to start to use this, and the more people we get into the site, the better it is from a passive security standpoint. So we're taking it, using the trail kind of as a functional element, but also as from a security type element. And then looking at ways that we could actually mow some trails right down into the meadow that could be mowed. So this is just an overview of how you can start to apply some of those techniques into pretty much a conventional site. This is another one that we have really high-end residential in this township on both sides. And the township has a little strip of land that runs right down through here. And I don't have the property lines on this, but it's pretty much a very slim corridor, about 30 foot wide, that goes from the center line of the stream and then goes straight along this edge. So looking at the context of that, we could look at just that 30-foot wide corridor with the straight line along both sides and then establish a riparian buffer in there. But it really isn't playing on the context of where it is within the community, because you end up with that straight line and then everyone mows up to that and then you have your property line. So the surveyor is actually kind of just designing or establishing this design. So what we're proposing here is to actually, okay, maybe we can get kind of a trail system that meanders a little bit within the township's boundary, but also to start to establish, there's some pretty steep slopes here and around through here, and it levels out through here. Again, on this side, there's really steep slopes, and you can see it right through here. Even though these properties go back the whole way, this is that no man's land. These homeowners really use the property up around their homes, but when you get down past that steep slope, they end up just mowing it, but they really don't use it for anything. They just maintain it because that's the way it was. So the Watershed Alliance they're going to get together with these homeowners and say, is there a way we could establish a no-mow zone up to the bottom or the top of that slope, that you start to get more of a curved effect that starts to blend not just this riparian buffer and the benefits that it has, but also start to blend it into the community a little bit more. So again, that's looking a little beyond the site, but showing how this sustainable landscape could fit within the overall context of the community. So the challenges of these landscapes, and I think overall is going to be that they constantly change. And when you know, in my background as a landscape architect and having worked with, you know, various landscape contracting companies over the years, typically conventional landscaping, you have a mulch bed with the plants in, and it's a control environment to a degree. You have a really good understanding, yes, the plant's going to grow over time, but the public, your client, as well as the designer, knows that that is not going to change very much over time. What we're going to be talking about is how with sustainable landscapes, again, they're going to change. It's going to look completely different from the day you put it in. In fact, it might not look like anything the day you put it in. It could be a mud flat when you put it in. That first growing season, it's going to look completely different. The next growing season, the growing season after that. It changes each season as the plant material starts to grow, as it starts to get established. It can change and vary from May to April to August to September. Within the same year, it changes and it looks different. So understanding those changes and working with that is really important. Educating the client, understanding that, and then being able to convey that to the client ahead of time so that they're aware of what those changes are over time. So we do that a lot with, we found that photographs are the best to use. You know, there's photo simulation and there's sketching and things like that you can do to kind of give people an idea on how it might change. But people like to either see it, get out, look at it, and that's another reason we do the tour, and we hope that you come down to Lidditz so that we can look at some of the projects in Lancaster City, some of the projects around in Lancaster County, that you can see over time how these projects have changed. And by having images, being able to go back and convey that to your clients is really important. And then again, the maintenance and management of it. How is it going to be maintained? And understanding that, and that actually becomes a component of how it is designed. So this is an example of that, you know, the issue of how it constantly changes. And this is a project in Ephrata, Pennsylvania. Probably, I think it was around 1996, 1997 that this went in the ground. And there's an outfall at this point that drains a pretty significant roadway into this field. The borough had been maintaining it pretty much as a lawn area, but they were having trouble. You know, they kept getting stuck in it. They didn't know quite what to do. The local watershed alliance saw this and got a grant to actually create a wetland in that location at that outfall. So that outfall is up here. And it's kind of a perch system. This is the Cocalico Creek down through here, and it drops probably about 3 foot from this sidewalk then down into the stream. But the wetland was meant to treat and improve water quality at that outfall. So you can see this is what the residents saw and had seen for years before the project was actually implemented. Was a mowed lawn area. After construction, this is probably, I'd say maybe a week or two after construction, you can see there were a number of plugs that went in. Actually, it was probably longer than that because it looks like some of the seeding is starting to come up. So this might be a month or two after construction. So there was excavation work that went on, so there was a lot of construction as part of that. So this is what I call kind of that oh wow phase, and everybody gets all excited. The flowers come in prolifically. You know, you have a lot of diversity. People see, wow, there's color. This is exciting. This is something new. So they get excited about this. This is probably about 4 years later. So you can see the difference between, this is that first growing season, you get that first flush. Well, over time, the plant material starts to get comfortable in certain areas depending on the hydrology that gets established. In this case, there's a fair amount of standing water. It really kind of established itself as well as a pretty well-functioning wetland. And a lot of the sedges and rushes, and there's actually buttonbush in here that got established, so it really became, you know, from that standpoint in creating kind of a wetland, it was really very successful. But how do you, this is a whole different landscape than when it first went into the ground. And it's that plant material really kind of settling in, getting itself established. The tussock sedge became very happy in this condition. Some of the other plants, the Riparian, ended up kind of out along the edges and things like that, but they will not take that kind of wet feed. This is the stage, which every project has their little, you know, influences, things that come in and affect it. And we went out to the site and we're like, okay, what happened? This was so gorgeous, and it has been, you know, for the last 7 years, it's been very well established. Well, the stream system, there was a flood, and something got caught down at the turn, and it backed up, and then it flooded this whole area, which had never happened before, because it was so, this section was so far out of the actual stream. So it backed it up. The sediment, when it drained, ended up filling in the wetland, and we ended up with about, we went out and measured about 3 inches, I guess, of sediment that kind of filled in. So we looked at it, and I'm thinking, all right, this will be interesting, because how is that amount of influx of sediment going to affect this wetland now? And my first thought was, we're going to lose the herbaceous layer, because that has 3 inches of soil or sediment that's come in, that has to affect it. And we'll probably be able to, you know, the shrubs will probably be able to make it. Well, it actually was the opposite of that. The buttonbush, we didn't lose a number of the buttonbush just because they really like those wet conditions. But the herbaceous layer actually maintained, and the sedges came back up, and it wasn't an issue. But what we did have problems with was, with that sediment, brought a lot of weed seed. So what hadn't been in here before, we ended up with purple loosestrife. We had a pretty good influx of thistle that came in. So we ended up having to go back in and maintain it, almost like we did at the very beginning after that influx. So this is just one example, but to show you that sometimes there are influences that you can't control that'll come in and kind of change the dynamic. And it's just going back, looking at it. Sometimes it's going to require some maintenance and going back in again. This is another, just another example of how to integrate the design of these natural landscapes into kind of a more conventional type development. And this project is in southern Chester County. It's a golf course, and the client actually built the course first, and it became very successful. It was an open links course, Wingcoat. I don't know if anyone's played or been in that area, but very open, rolling course in the middle of an open farm. Actually, this is a huge farming community, agricultural community in southern Chester County. So they brought us on and actually contacted me and said, you know, Kelly, we're going to be starting to build houses into the golf course, which is actually a typical subdivision. They're 1 acre lots that went into the golf course itself. And the township is requiring us to plant street trees, and it was ridiculous. It was 3 to 3.5 inch caliber street trees, 30 foot on center, down all of the streets. And so what we looked at were two major components of this project. One was, how do we integrate these homes into a golf course that's already existing and very successful, and people like the views and like, you know, the openness of it. How do we introduce homes into that and not ruin that ambience? And then also, how do we address, do we really want to line all these streets with 3 to 3.5 inch caliber trees? Is there something else that we can do to actually benefit that look good, but also fit better, I think, with the aesthetics of the region. So what we looked at was we established between the golf course and the actual 1 acre lots was a golf course environment easement. And what it is it wraps in and around each one of the homes. So almost, like I said, it goes in and around each one of the homes and at the edge of the golf course. So it blends into the course, but then it also wraps in and around each one of the homes. And the goal of this was to actually use the meadow to create the buffer to protect the views out, because we analyzed, the play and how people were looking in their views as they were playing the course. And then protected the views from the homeowners out to the course, but then buffered the views for the golf course by using soil and kind of mounding, and then some meadow on top of that to create kind of a buffer. So that was one component, was that easement. And then the other part of it was, can we reforest large patches within the community as an offset for the street trees? And we went to the township. We ended up with, I think, almost 3 times the number of trees ultimately. They went in as small container seedlings, so they were like 5 to 7 gallons when they went in the ground. But at build out, we felt we would have 2 to 2.5 inch caliber trees pretty much, and the township would ultimately get a lot more trees. And we felt that it would fit better for the context of the community and the region, because it's agricultural, having forest patches within the home within the community would just fit better. So this is how it started to play out. This picture was taken about 7 years after implementation. So it was a soft meadow that wrapped in and around, so really taking the course and blending it in and around each one of the homes. And the reforestation ended up starting to buffer some of the homes and created those patches within the community. One of the components of this, and again, these are the lessons learned, was that the meadow was actually established as each homeowner bought a lot. And LandStudies then worked with each homeowner when they bought the lot. We helped them to site their home, and then there was a package included for landscaping around the home, but most importantly, we were able to be that constant to help them to establish the consistency of where this meadow went for what the needs were for each homeowner. So this was interesting because most of the clients, or most of the homeowners, were move-up empty nesters, so they were moving into much larger homes in retirement. And they wanted to be on the golf course, but most of them were like, hey, that's great. I want less lawn area to actually mow. So we were able to overall reduce the 1 acre lots, the actual maintained lawn area, by at least 1/3 to 2/3 on each of those 1 acre lots by establishing this meadow. What happened by doing it with each lot was that this has been developed over a long period of time, and the lots went in different locations within the development. So it was, some meadows went in one season, another went in 2 years later. Sometimes the seed mix was varied, and one homer would say, I want their meadow, why doesn't my meadow look like their meadow? So in retrospect, to keep it consistent, it probably would have been best to actually have seeded the meadow all consistently at one time up front, and then actually mowed into it to establish the lawn areas. But overall, I think the community has embraced it, and over time, it has started to settle out and been pretty consistent overall. So, like I said, those first couple years, it was a little more challenging. Educating the client, again, this is what I was talking about earlier. This is what it looks like probably the first growing season when the warm season grasses go in. being able to identify what the warm season grasses are, and you can see those rows kind of going down through where those meadow grasses are. So that's what it looks like when it first goes in. These grasses, if you don't know, you need to know what is in the mix and how tall they get, because a trail through a meadow that has big blue stem and Indian grass and some of these taller switch grasses, you can't see out of it when it becomes really well established. So that's a really important consideration, is to know what your seed mix is and know what's going in. Maintenance and management. Again, this is a reforestation area that went down, was put in down in Delaware. And this was right after implementation, so the meadow was actually seeded with, again, it was a warm season grass meadow mix, and then the trees went in as containerized seedlings. This was in 2011, was this picture, so what is that, 5 years later. The meadow has become established, and the trees have really started to fill in. They were very happy here. It was maintained very well, this section of it. They well managed the area to keep invasives out, and did the right type of mowing to really get the meadow established well. What we found was interesting was, in this case, the client was concerned about these areas of reforestation that were going in behind the homes, and they felt that it probably wasn't going to look that nice. So they wanted to establish along the property line larger trees, more ornamental type trees. So they put in crab apples and cherries, and they lined them right along the edge of the property line of the residence. Right where the survey line was, I think it was a 15-foot setback. They did this buffer and they planted all these trees. Well, these trees went in, they were 5 to 7 gallon when they went in. The reforestation trees were 1 to 2 gallon trees when they went in. These just struggled. I think they were maintained, but they just don't look that nice. And if you look at these compared to the size of the 1 to 2 gallon that went in, it's pretty marked, the difference. So what we found is, in some cases, the smaller container trees and shrubs tend to do better because they can adapt to the soil conditions as they grow. Sometimes the more ornamental the material, maybe larger size, they've been in the nursery a lot longer. They're really happy and really well taken care of in the nursery. You stick them out in this type of landscape where it's very exposed, and they just have a tougher time. So I think that's, I thought that was an interesting comparison. This is the same project. The area, like I was saying, where the meadow was managed and it was maintained, they have a really pretty well established warm season grass meadow that looks great and is, pretty much a native environment. There were some edge areas which were seeded with the exact same mix, but it was not maintained the same. And it's completely overrun with autumn olive now, which is an invasive shrub species that has come in. I think it's pretty prolific in this area. You guys seeing a lot of the autumn olive. And if this can be maintained just by making sure that you do that mowing once a year or twice a year to keep the weeds down. In some cases it needs to be sprayed. Once it gets to this point, there's a lot of cost associated with going back in and trying to fix it. So, just kind of understanding that. And then just quickly, related to kind of the right plant, right place, and some things that Ben will be talking about this afternoon, stream restoration. But looking at these sites which are, severely degraded, here you have a stream channel that's pretty incised, a lot of instability and erosion, and actually going in and restoring the floodplain, how this changes from the standpoint of The hydrology in this area is very different from the hydrology up on the upper levels of that floodplain. And by having that consistent hydrology in these areas, we're able to do two things with this type of restoration, and this comes into that function. But improving the flood flows, attenuating the floodplain that actually floods, and establishing plant material that will take those conditions. So this is after construction. This picture is actually taken, I think it was a couple weeks, 2 to 3 weeks after the plugs were planted. And this was what we had 18 inches in a 2-week period. So this was Tropical Storm Lee. When Tropical Storm Lee came through, and I was convinced that after this storm we were going to end up with just a pile of plugs down here at the end of it. And we only lost maybe 10% of the plugs on this. They really, within that 2 to 3 week period, they had rooted in just enough that they were able to stay established, but also it just shows the function and the improved function of this floodplain, and that the flows really spread out and they reduce the energy of it. So this is the following growing season, so you can see the plant material is starting to get established. And then again, kind of that change, this is one of the bioretention there's like a wetland pocket at one of the outfalls going into this floodplain, and just showing how the plant material, what we found is when it has that consistent hydrology, the plants that really like the wet feed will get very well established, and usually very quickly, because they don't go through that first year of, it's really dry, they don't have that consistence of moisture to help with that first year or two to get it established. So you can see the diversity that starts to become established. The importance of soils, this was a lesson learned, and this was a volunteer project that a watershed group looked at doing, and they got all the local neighbors, Girl Scout, Boy Scout groups, they came in. We actually established kind of an area here, and this is a drainage channel that comes down. There's an outfall up above it that drains a pretty sizable watershed area in Lidditz Run. This is a project you'll see if you come down for the tour. It's called Butterfly Acres. And this was probably about, I want to say about 12 years ago. And it was a valiant effort of actually putting this plant material in to improve the biodiversity of the swale and to ideally improve water quality. What happened though was we didn't have a clear understanding of the soils, and later there was another project that I'll talk about that was actually implemented here, and we actually did the trenching and did the soil testing. But what we didn't know when we did that first planting was that there's a sizable clay layer very dense clay layer under this swale. And so what happens is you can plant that plant material into the ground, which, the plugs that we thought were going to do very well. While they had a tough time getting established, and the weed seed that came into that area, it wasn't enough to compete with the actual weeds. So it ended up just being, it was impossible to stay ahead of the weeds that had been exposed as part of that project. This was probably about 4 or 5 years after that volunteer planting. A local group, this site had been identified as a critical aquifer recharge area in our community. And a local industry, it was Pfizer at the time, was looking at, they do a lot of water withdrawals, and they saw the potential of if they would improve the infiltration within this critical recharge area, it could benefit them from a permitting standpoint for their withdrawal. So they helped to fund an actual critical aquifer recharge restoration project. And so this is that same swale, but we went in, there was a lot of engineering associated with this. We did trenching and basically came up with a strategy of restoring the swale, being able to spread the flows out, and you'll see that in a later slide, but established, and this swale as it goes down through, trenches go perpendicular across this swale. They were about 5 foot wide and about 10 foot deep, I think 10 to 12 foot deep, filled with a really porous material. And the whole point was that the water would flow, I have that picture now. The water would flow down the swale, hit these more porous areas, infiltrate and recharge. These went the whole way down to connect with the groundwater. The approach was also selected for 2 other reasons. One is this is a karst area, we have a lot of limestone, so we were looking at a way to mitigate for potential sinkhole. From sinkholes being developed, and this approach worked in being able to not concentrate that flow, but just take it and try to infiltrate within a karst area. It was also cost prohibitive to take out all of that clay soil and replace it with a new soil. So we took, I think it was about 4 inches was replaced on the top layer with a really good, more kind of a loamier soil where we could get plant material established. So this project was established through 4 phases over, I want to say it's maybe 1/3 of a mile overall, the actual swale itself. So there were 4 phases implemented over a period of about 5 years. Pretty much the same strategy from a functional standpoint, as well as the same strategy from the planting and what we put on top. And it's really nice to now be able to look at all 4 of those phases and how they look so different and how they change over time. You can always walk back through and see over the years how each section has changed. So this is pretty much the mix, the first growing season, because of, and again, sometimes you'll have the same seed mix, but some of the plants, because of the conditions when it went in, you may have more of an influx of, and here the Coreopsis really took off this first growing season in this particular phase. In other phases, this same seed mix, we didn't get this much of a flux with the Coreopsis, which was, it's really interesting to see. And then this is the upper area, so you can see kind of, you know, the diversity in the herbaceous that went in. And then over time, as those trees start to establish, so this is probably about 5 years after it was installed. So you can see the difference, the trees, you know, there's a couple trees in here at this point, and then 5 years later, these trees really start to become established, so it starts to change. So that's done with this. I think Celia's on next. Okay.
Question?
Any questions?
Yeah, in terms of meadow management, in terms of someone wants to keep it in a meadow over time, you're suggesting 1 or 2 mowings a year. Is there a time of the year that's more preferable to mow?
Try that again. Time of year
Yeah.
to actually seed the meadows?
So once the meadows are established,
Okay.
what's kind of the optimum mowing regime or time of the year to prevent the succession from happening?
Okay. I'm going to give you a typical scenario because each time it's really kind of dependent on the client and, you know, the specific needs of a site. But typically it's the first growing season we'll go in and probably we may mow twice. Once a couple months after it's established, and then another time probably about 4 to 5 months after that. So typically we like to install the warm season meadows before the end of June. So there's a window between like March and the end of June, getting those meadows established. If it goes in March, we'll probably go in and mow in June. But what's critical, and I'll be talking about this a little bit tomorrow, and I have some photos, is making sure that it's not moved too short. A lot of times they'll go in with regular, mowing equipment, and they mow it down to like here. It's a different kind of mowing. You want it to be mowed taller, and so that you get some sunlight down, and that those to get the warm seasons established. But you don't want to buzz cut it and take it too far down. So what we'll do is we'll look at a minimal mowing, and then sometimes we'll go back in and we'll mow again in say August or September. Sometimes it's just a matter of going in and string trimming down, if you have reed canary or patch of reed canary that's coming in, or to manage the thistle. So it might be more strategic going in and managing. It really depends a little bit on the meadow. Any other questions?
Kelly, just an observation on those plants that struggled. It's just a great testament for, those ornamentals that went in were probably not native to the region.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I don't know if you use RPM plants, like with, plants that are cultivated in the pot or trimmed or pruned, or
Yeah,
you have a special
I'm not
nursery.
sure where those had come from.
Yeah, okay, well.
I'm pretty sure they were all containers room, but I can't remember where the ornamentals came from.
Yeah, and that is a great slide just to show the contrast with quality plants that are regionally adaptive or even regionally grown compared to something from North Carolina or down south. It may look pretty for a season, but it's just not going to make it here. Plus, those might have been eaten by deer. It was like a candy store for deer and other rodents probably. So that's a great example,
Yeah.
really. Thank you.
Yeah, I just started that.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Okay, so I thought that was a really good introduction to a lot of stuff that I'm going to talk about too. So there'll be a little bit of overlap, but I'm going to focus more on how you can get credit for planting trees or stream buffers in terms of the Bay TMDL. So for those of you who weren't here yesterday, and just a reminder to everyone else, at the Chesapeake Stormwater Network, Tom is the stormwater technical coordinator to the Bay Program's urban stormwater work. And that is a bunch of nonsense, but what it really means is how do you get credit for implementing different BMPs in the urban sector towards meeting the Bay TMDL. So just kind of a caveat, I noticed that we have the section on riparian buffers from the Pennsylvania Stormwater Manual. So you'll see differences in kind of the pollutant reduction efficiencies, because these are the ones that have been established for using towards the Bay TMDL. Not necessarily the same as the state stormwater manual. So tree planting and street buffers. So I think this is kind of interesting because for those of you who were here yesterday, on the second site that we went to on the field trip, the town park, there was a lot of green area. Brian showed us some potential retrofit options. But I also thought that there were other restoration opportunities on that site that weren't necessarily structural in nature. Like I think some of the sustainable landscape information that Kelly just presented would have been a really good option on that site. Obviously, they had a bunch of erosion in specific areas that needed to be dealt with, but incorporating more trees or buffers might have been a better option. a cheaper option than the structural BMPs.